I just wanted to take this opportunity to just talk a little bit about the issue of applying a herbicide this time of year in a pasture. A lot of people I interact with don't really consider this timing all that often, something that they would do, but in fact, it turns out there's quite a few weeds that applying a herbicide right now in a pasture works really well for. So we're going to try to talk about that as we go through here. And so in this first slide, you just see that, obviously we want to know what the weed is, if at all possible, not just guess and hope we know what we got out there, but really know what it is, because knowing what it is will help us to know whether it's an annual, biennial, or perennial. And that in and of itself often determines the best timing for application, which is what we wanted to talk about today. So on the next slide, you'll see some work we did years ago. And it's just to illustrate the point that this was a survey of 66 pastures we did around the state, and the black line is really the only one that's I really want to focus on in this particular case, is just to show that this time of year we're pretty much peaking out with having the most number of weeds out there in our pastures, and that's a combination of a lot of factors. Number one, we tend to have some annual grasses that invade later in the season. Number two, we often have some of our broadleaf weed species. There are several that I can think of that just tend to come on later in the season. And then, of course, we always have perennials, but some are just tend to be a little bit later emerging. So all of that rolled up together just kind of adds up to the fact that this time of year can be a good time for herbicide applications in pastures. Just depends on what you have out there, as we'll see as we go through here. So on the next slide, we have just some general recommendations we've been given ever since I've been here. It's just something I've showed at a lot of our meetings is, it would be nice, and I know everybody wants just a one-time easy answer as to when is the best time to spray in your pastures. And I would love to give that to you, but I have to always come back to, well, it really depends on what your weed is. And not only that, but what growth cycle, what is it, an annual, is it a biennial, is it a perennial? Because that really determines in most cases what's the best time. And so as you can see here with perennials, that time usually translates into late summer, early fall, into that time frame we are right now. And with some of our brush species as well, I would say the same thing. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. And we're going to give you some specific, examples and give you some very specific recommendations. And Tim's had some success stories that he's going to share and all of that. But it really depends on what you're going after, what's your best weed as to when you should think about spraying. So the next slide illustrates what we're trying to get at. And this is just an example. This is just something published in the literature. I know maybe not everybody will track with this, but this is the reason behind the rationale of all of this. And this is just tracking, in this study, these authors, they're tracking when carbohydrates accumulate in the roots of, in this case, hemp dogbane. But again, this is just an example. It's going to be different with every weed. And quite frankly, this is a type of work we need more of, because this can help us determine when it might be a good time to spray. And so for this particular weed, you see that, in hemp dogbane, somewhere around August through really the end of September here, we start seeing in the natural physiological processes of this plant that more and more carbohydrates are being directed toward the roots. And so these authors, they basically have 2 years of data. They're measuring what's happening in these plants over 2 different years. And as you can see, the curves look very similar in both years, but somewhere around that August to September time frame, there's a lot of carbohydrates that are being shunted towards those roots. So what we're trying to get at is, wouldn't it be a good idea to try to apply a herbicide during that time frame to get those herbicides down where we need them to get the most ideal control? And so that's kind of the whole concept. And again, this is going to vary based on species, but it's the reason why we're here talking about this at this time of year, when a lot of people think, well, this isn't something I would normally think of doing at this time of year. Just to not show you a whole lot of graphs and data and everything else that we've gathered over the years, I just basically just am giving you a bulleted list here of some species that we have done research on in the state of Missouri and found that fall herbicide applications work really well. And when I say fall, I guess I should qualify that a little bit. I mean, late summer, early fall, we're talking, into August and September, certainly. Usually we don't want to go any closer than a week or two before their first frost in your area. And I know we don't know when that's going to occur always, but if you can just kind of use the average date of first frost. But with blackberry and dewberry in particular, we have done the studies many years, and actually is one of the first kinds of pasture research I did years ago here. And we quickly kind of shifted our recommendation from that kind of May time frame to this time of year right now, because of how much better weed control we got with the herbicides applied at that time. Sericea lespedeza is very similar, although I'll say that you can get control of Sericea lespedeza at a lot of different time frames, and I'll have a slide on that later, but I'm just saying that you can still control Sericea lespedeza even in the state it's in now. We've done many studies on it, and it's no problem to do that right now. The same I could say for nodding spurge, ironweed, ragweed, and cockleburr. All of those, there are multiple times during the year where you can still get control, and this is one of those times. I'll call out musk and bull thistle a little bit here, just to say that a musk and bull thistle herbicide application this time of year is mostly for those seedlings that are coming up now, and we're going to see over the next few months. And if you get a residual herbicide out there, you can even have some residual activity to prevent those seedlings from even happening. So it kind of varies on the herbicide. Most of our pasture herbicides have pretty good amount of residual in this case, but they do vary with regard to that. So, and then the last thing I just said here is, are there others? And, that's where I think we need more work. But from what I've seen of this timing in Missouri, it is certainly a favorable timing for the control of a lot of our most common species. So next slide, I think, just talks about that last factor, which is, okay, so I've kind of just laid out the whole concept of why we would spray this time of year. And now with Tim's help here in a little bit, we're just going to go through some of our most common weeds and give some of our recommendations, as well as, like I said, some of those success stories that Tim can share. So on the next slide, we have basically all the different options. I hesitate to say all because I'm sure I've probably missed something here with some trade name or something, but there's a lot of products in pasture herbicide market now, and there have been some new ones introduced in just the past year, and there is expected to be a new one introduced next year. And so we're going to kind of go over those, but these are just all the different products. And as you can see, there's more and more that are 2 and 3, some cases 3-way combinations of products. There's not as much emphasis as maybe there used to be on the single ingredient products. So let me just cover some of the newer ones real quick, and just in case people aren't familiar with these. So on the next slide, we have just kind of some bullet points. This is just something that Tim put together, and it says it pretty well. Duracore came out this year from Corteva. Used to be Dow AgroSciences, now called Corteva. This fluoropiroxafen is one of their newest active ingredients. They're evaluating it and using it, and it's registered in a couple of different crops, with pastures being one of them. And it is a mix of what many of you might know as Milestone plus this new active ingredient. And we've got this, I didn't have time to put everything together that we've gathered this past year, or I think we even did a little bit with this the year before, but we've got some new data on where this might fit in Missouri and what weeds and all of that. But it's in this premix, as you might imagine, it's a pretty broad spectrum product for a lot of our annual, biennial, and perennial broadleaf weeds and certain woody species. But we've had a couple of trials out this year, and we're going to be summarizing those and getting that information out here in the next month or so. The other one that is generating a lot of, I guess, questions is called ProClova. It is not out yet. It is not known for sure that it will be out in 2021. It just depends on EPA, but it is expected that it will be out in 2021. The unique thing about this is it'll be the first herbicide that does not kill white clover or annual lespedeza. There's been that desire and need by a lot of growers for a lot of years, but we've never had that in our pasture offerings. I will say that it's very specific. I didn't stutter or write that accidentally. The white clover or annual lespedeza is it. If you have red clover out there, you're probably going to kill it. So, it is very specific on the legumes that tolerate it. We have a number of trials out there as well with this. We've been doing over the past couple of years, and we've seen some pretty decent results. But again, just don't want people to over expect on this product, because one thing we do know about it is it has almost zero residual. It's very little residual, and so obviously that's going to affect the level of weed control you get. But we had this product out in 4 different locations around the state with a graduate student research trial this year, and one of those was Tim helped us out with, and he's got some pictures from that. So I'll let Tim talk a little bit. He's got a couple of pictures here after this slide. The next slide, I think, is one of his, and he might want to mention. I think I know what he's getting at here, but he might want to mention a couple of things about these pictures that are the next couple of slides.
Sure, Kevin. I took this picture of a dairy farm several years ago, and I get this comment a lot. I'd have sprayed this, but it would have killed my clover. And you see just how much thistle is out in that field. and the productivity of that field was pretty limited. And I think, you know, two things: we get concerned about killing clover, but for one thing, do find that a lot of clover will come back in a year or two. And then now, of course, we have this option, hopefully next year with ProClova to address this problem head on. Another point I wanted to make was that I think there's a lot of confusion right now. People are starting to hear that there's a white clover friendly product coming, and then they go to the store and they hear this new product called Duracor, and they all think that that's it. I've heard from the sales rep of Corteva that that's becoming a real issue. So be sure to understand that it's ProClova that is the product that is clover friendly. And also in the trial that Kevin did, I was surprised how fast it ProClova laid the white clover over. I thought it was going to kill it. I thought this isn't what it's supposed to do, but surprisingly it came back up, and it may have, I don't know if it stunted it much, it's hard to tell, but it's definitely survived. Let's go to the next slide, Jim. This is a picture of that trial in Stone County, and you can see the ProClova on the left and the Duracor on the right. And the Duracor, once they, you know, obviously there was some grass in there that there's not a lot of fescue in this particular stand, but it did release a lot of the grass that's there. And on the left, with the Duracor killing the clover, but on the left you have the ProClova that retained it. So quite a bit of red clover or white clover in that field, particularly in this particular area of that field. And if you're certainly wanting to keep the clover alive, we hope to have options very soon.
Like I said earlier, one of the first weeds that I worked with, at least in a pasture environment, probably more than a dozen years ago, was Blackberry in pastures in Missouri. And at that time, it was pretty commonly recommended for a May or June-ish kind of application. We did a lot of research, and again, we can I'm not giving you all these graphs and everything on purpose, but you can go on our website and find some of that data. But these are just some highlights of what we found. And the number one thing we found, and really it wasn't anything I came up with. I had a colleague that actually in the South that said, Kevin, you ought to start trying some of these fall applications on that Blackberry. And we did, and he sure was right. And it was way better than anything we had done during the summer. So it is a very favorable timing for blackberries, which is one of the toughest weeds we got out there. And I don't want anybody to think that you're going to get 100% control of blackberry or anything, because it's usually a several year battle to get this stuff under control when it's gotten really bad. But we've seen great, better, best, whatever you want to call it, control out of any of the metsulfuron products. But that's not to say that pasture guard mixes or even mixes that have remedy in them are not also good, because they are. So you have a little bit of flexibility. A lot of people go with a Grazon plus remedy. Some people just go with a pasture guard or some kind of pasture guard mix. But I think a lot of times we're missing one of the cheapest options out there that actually works really good, and that's a metsulfuron product. So that's our basic blackberry recommendations, and probably more interesting than that is Tim's got some great some of these success stories where he can show this has really worked in these next couple of pictures.
On this particular farm in Taney County, this was probably over 15 years ago, but this particular field was brush hogged off and on, I think, since 1970. And it was cleared that day or that year, and brush hogged just sporadically. And that was the weed control program. And obviously they didn't do it every year, but you can see that, you know, when I saw it, it was pretty tall of saplings, a lot of elm, oak, persimmon. And within just a very short time, we started seeing a lot of some kill. I think in particular, they were using the remedy grades on P plus D mix at that time. And today that field is a hay field. It didn't take very long for that to get to that point. So it can, you know, it's just kind of a testament to how some well-timed sprays can make a huge difference and get things under control and rein in the problem. The next field is over on pretty much that same farm that the ProClova and Duracor trial is on, but on a field several, you know, about a quarter mile away. But this was a 70-acre piece of ground that was purchased, and it was overgrazed. It had a lot of broom sedge in it and a pretty heavy stand of blackberries. You can see this was taken in the fall of the year after frost, and you can see blackberries just covered the place, and there were a lot of cedars. And he was determined to take that hillside farm and make it productive again. And so he went ahead and sprayed it at a very, you know, at the proper times of year, and got some pretty good control. He had to mow it to get a boomless sprayer through it. It was that much of a mess. But there was enough cedar in there that he decided he better go ahead and just doze some of it off and clear it a little bit before he started planting forages back. But the key here is that he sprayed it before he destroyed the vegetation. A lot of people come to us and they'll say, you know, we cleared it off and we're getting all these saplings back, this massive root system in the ground, and then we don't have any leaf surface area to get the control on. And so that is key to get the spray on while the vegetation is still pretty tall and where we have a lot of surface area to deal with for on the leaves. That makes a huge difference. And that's a concept that, you know, we've got to get out there. He went ahead and planted some intermediate crops like rye and then I think crabgrass. And then the next slide, Clint went ahead and planted it to Max Q2 Texoma fescue, one of the novel fescues in the fall of 2019. And this is what it looks like today. It's just a gorgeous stand of Texoma fescue and very, very productive. So it took a few years to get to this point, but again, well-timed sprays. I can't say whether that dead tree in the middle had something to do with the sprays or not, but he still has some live trees out there for shade.
Thanks, Tim. Those are great testaments, I think, that really show what can be done. I just got a few slides here that are really specific weed by weed kind of things. And so I probably don't know why I didn't have horse nettle on my earlier list of things that could be controlled this time of year, because it's definitely one that falls into that category. I guess what we're trying to say here is just that we have done some horse nettle trials. Some people call us bull nettle. And basically, there's a lot of our products that come out to be equal. We really don't see any difference in the level of control. So you have options, and you can pick based on price or based on maybe other weeds that are out there and what's the efficacy on those other weeds and all of that. Another one we have gotten more questions, or I have, I don't know if Tim has, but just more in recent years. It seems to kind of cropped up in the past 3-4 years more and more. This one is, it is poisonous, whether it's baled fresh or baled hay. It tends to come on later in the season anyway. You're probably never going to even see it until around July, or maybe early July. If you're really looking, you can probably find some seedlings. Just depends on where you are. We had a trial with Pat Miller down south of Kansas City. I can't remember, it was a couple years ago on this one, because we were getting so many questions about it. And we found that, oddly enough, a lot of our what we call our growth regulators, or our synthetic auxin herbicides, the 2,4-Ds and dicambas, even picloram, really didn't do as good as just metsulfuron. Metsulfuron is death on this particular plant. It's really easy to kill with any of the metsulfuron products. So if you still have this now, I don't think it's too late. I think it's getting pretty close to being too late, but again, it is poisonous. We've had some problems with, I'm pretty sure with our vet school, we had some problems with this, even killing some animals and all of that. So it's another one I just wanted to mention. Just a few more. I mean, I've already talked about musk and bull thistle, and kind of what I said about horse nettle, it kind of rings true with as far as specific herbicides. It's very similar story with musk and bull thistle. We've had a lot of different thistle trials over the years, and you go out there and you spray Grazon P+D, or you spray Grazon Next and you spray 2,4-D plus Banville beside it, and all these different products to compare. In many cases, and in most of the cases, in my experience, you're hard pressed to separate out some number one treatment. There's many that look very similar. So again, we already talked about how fall applications can provide control of seedlings, but this, obviously, you can control musk and bull thistle in the spring as well, and there's plenty of people that target that timing. Sericea has been a weed that I've watched it take over the state of Missouri in 16 years of being here. When I first came, it was pretty much only in southwest part of the state, and now I can drive all over the north and find it in different places as well. It's a tremendously invasive weed, and as I said earlier, this is not one that I'm saying you have to spray in the fall. I'm just saying that we've evaluated it in the fall, in the spring, in the summer. And if you get the product right, it really doesn't matter when you spray it. That's what our data says. The best product, the best active ingredients for this weed is in Pasture Guard. This contains 2 active ingredients, and both of them are really good on Sericea. That's not to say that triclopyr alone doesn't have good activity on it, or even metsulfuron, but I would put both of those a notch down below Pasture Guard. So Pasture Guard is my #1 recommendation. And you can still spray it now. You can spray it in the spring once you start seeing those small plants, or really it's probably early summer by that time, but you have some flexibility here, and Pasture Guard is one of the best. The last one I have is Ironweed, and I just put this one in here because it's definitely one that fits this time of year. Ironweed is a later season perennial, and it's one of the most obvious ones we see in our pastures this time of year. Most of it has flowered by now or is flowering, but that's not something that should deter you necessarily from spraying it. We have seen just as good a control by spraying it now as pre-bloom. And on this one, triclopyr is the key. So anything with triclopyr in it, usually a Grazon P&D plus a remedy mix or something like that, or even a 2,4-D plus a remedy. But the key is that the product needs to have triclopyr in it in order to kill this one. So with that, I hope I didn't take too much time. That's really all we had, Tim and I. We just wanted to share some thoughts about fall herbicide applications for pastures and some specific chemical recommendations. If there's any questions, we'd be glad to try to take them for you.
What is the best herbicide to spray for ragweed in the fall?
Yeah, great question. should have mentioned that through there. I don't think I mentioned much of ragweed, but we have some other studies on kind of tracking the emergence of weeds in pastures that we did as part of that survey. And I was even surprised to find that you can find ragweed emerging in a typical Missouri pasture from anytime from April something to now. I mean, it is amazing that you can get that kind of spread and how long that stuff can germinate given the right conditions. So I guess the reason I bring that up is because ragweed, and I will also throw in cockleburr, are two very common annuals that we see this time of year. And the message is the same for both of them, in my opinion, and that is that every pasture product that we've ever sprayed, especially if it's a premix of two active ingredients, is going to kill those. They're very easy to kill. The only thing I've ever seen give a little less control is just like going out there with 2,4-D alone. I have seen that not work as well, but it still works pretty good. But you know, graze on P plus D, any of the metsulfuron products, graze on Next, any of these common pasture mixes will do well on those annual weeds like ragweed and cockleburr.
Is it possible to control most weeds by mowing? And if so, how many times per year? Timing on the mowing and the mowing height.
Yeah, see, this is a common question, and I get it. I mean, this probably goes back to Tim's, example of not wanting to kill the clover and all of that. But even in this last slide that I have up here, this is one of the few weeds that we actually have research data on mowing, and it's the ironweed slide. And if you notice, the last bullet is there has been some research that shows if you mow 3 times per year for 2 years in a row, you can basically mow away ironweed and get 80 to 90% control. That's not going to be the case with every weed. Some weeds in our pastures tolerate mowing no problem. They'll find a way. I would say things like ragweed and things like that fall into that category. Certainly horse nettle doesn't really, it's kind of a low growing weed anyway. It'll just find a way to continue. So in most cases, the two things come to mind when I hear that question. Number one, not every weed is gonna respond to mowing, like I just said. And number two, I mean, how much does 3 mowings cost you per year for 2 years in a row compared to 1 herbicide application? So I think, you know, the amount of mowing that it takes to get control of some of these weeds is getting pretty close, or if not exceeding the cost of what a herbicide application would cost. But it's certainly an option for some weeds.
I would agree, and I've seen cases where people have tried to mow Sericea lespedeza and had no success at all. And I do have one other success story to throw out there, no pictures, but in Christian County, I was out on a farm 2 weeks ago where they had a whole hillside full of Sericea and used pasture guard last fall. And we couldn't see anything, any new Sericea coming back. And that's kind of unusual because usually you'll still have some. And I imagine there's more out there than I could see, but pretty good. He was pretty happy with his success.
I have thorny locusts scattered throughout fields. I intend to spray for weed control. I also have lots of blackberry and ragweed. Is pasture guard good enough to give control of the locusts, or do I need to add to it?
Well, you're talking about some of the hardest weeds we have to control there. The honey locust or thorny locust. To be just blunt, we haven't evaluated fall for the control of those, so I don't know how that would do. We have evaluated some different products for the control of thorny locusts, but it was in the spring as soon as they're leafing out. And we found, so I guess my answer, try to be quick here about my answer. It's, I would say, yeah, you probably need a good stout mix for thorny locust. You've already heard me say today that this time of year right now is great for blackberries, but I'm not so sure that it's the best for locusts. I just don't know. We haven't done the work, and I haven't seen anybody else, but we've seen a lot of mixes that do pretty good on locusts. You know, but I would consider a mix of two or maybe even three different products together. Some of the things we've done is like graze on P plus D plus Pasture Guard, or even one of the aminopyrrolid products that graze on next, plus a trichopyr. There's lots of combinations, but yeah, I don't, what I'm trying to get out, and not being too eloquent about it, is I don't know for sure if this timing would be favorable or not. I don't know if Tim has any thoughts on that or not.
I know I've suggested people try. I don't have a lot of feedback though, and with the understanding that they're taking a risk.
Yeah.
Wondering about perilla mint control and coralberry buckbrush control.
Well, perilla mint is an annual. It is poisonous. I will say I'm getting more frequent calls about it. I'm not sure why. I used to say, and I still do, that it's fairly easy to control. But I don't know why we're starting to get more and more calls about it, if there's something I'm missing there. But anyway, you know, it's an annual that I would almost put in the category of like a cockleburr and a ragweed. If you spray it with any of our common pasture herbicide mixes, you're probably gonna wipe it out pretty good. It tends to stay in those shady areas, and so sometimes that presents a challenge as far as maybe not being able to spray it where it's occurring. The other one was buckbrush, or some people call it coralberry. Actually, one of my predecessors in this job did some great work on that species, and we've also done a little bit on it. And there's two active ingredients that I would suggest. There's several that you could use, but 2,4-D, as cheap as it is actually very good on buckbrush. And this time of year is okay, although you can spray it right when it leaves out in the spring, which might be even a little better timing. And then the other active ingredient that we know works really well is, again, the metsulfuron products. And so I would just say, why not put those two together? But that's not to say that there aren't other options. We've sprayed Graze on Next and some of the other products and done pretty well with those. So, but some of the historical data shows 2,4-D and metsulfuron are some of the best on buckbrush.
What about non-ionic surfactants being added to these products or crop oils? We get that question.
Yeah, it's not required. I don't see any harm in it personally. In my own fields that I spray, which ain't much, but it's a little bit. But you know, I'd say why not? You know, I include it if there's anything that can give me a little more confidence that I'm gonna you know, get the herbicide onto the leaf and make it stay there and penetrate into the plant for no more money than it is, I say go with it. But it's not required in most of these products. I would say the metsulfuron products are the exception. They really want you to use a non-ionic surfactant, but it's just kind of a little bit of insurance. And if you're willing to spend that little bit more, I would do it.